Hey, welcome back to The Urban Monk. Dr. Pedram Shojai here today with Ocean Robbins. This guy's a hero. He has been doing advocacy stuff to make the planet better since he was a little kid. When I was off, throwing footballs and doing things that were completely knucklehead, he was already trying to make the world a better place. He's been at this for a very long time, and he's leading a revolution in food, the Food Revolution Network. Very interesting to see what he's doing. Very interesting to see how they're going after a lot of these big companies and making a difference. Just before I get into it, next week I have my Kung Fu Grandmaster, Carl Totten, on the show. It's an honor to have him. We start talking about the real kind of nuts and bolts of the martial arts and what they mean philosophically. Amazing show as well, so make sure you know that that's coming. Tune in next week. Right now, enjoy Ocean Robbins. He's amazing, and I'll see you on the other side, and we'll talk about it in the threads. So what is going on out there, man? It's been so crazy watching how this kind of ebb and flow of legislation, and we won this one, we lost that one, and you get your finger on the pulse. So I'd love to hear from you. What's happening?
Well, what's happening is that people are completely fed up with the status quo. I mean, that's the big headline, is that, McDonald's closed 700 restaurants last year, that sales of organic food, non-GMO certified food, farmers market sales, community-supported agriculture sales are all skyrocketing. People are more and more interested in real food, and we're realizing that the status quo isn't good enough, and that actually I think the American consumer has lost trust in the food industry. Yeah. So what's happening from there is that we're seeing this radical shift in how people are thinking and what they're wanting to buy. And the same practices that made the food industry companies giants of the 20th century will make them dinosaurs this century if they don't radically change their course. So legislatively, we're seeing some powerful shifts in terms of, GMO labeling is a really hot issue. 90% of the American public wants GMOs labeled. And, we're seeing a lot of interest in factory farms banning routine use of antibiotics. And many other powerful changes taking place.
So, we lost the Oregon vote, and everyone's like, see, big business won again, and, looking at who did it. But we learned so much in that process, and we learned who was funding the other side, and we really learned what their practices are. So I'd love to see you kind of unpack that a little bit.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about GMO labeling for a little bit, because that's one of the really hot issues of our times, right? And so again, just to give a little context for people, so GMO stands for genetically modified organism, and most of the corn and soybeans and sugar beets in the United States today, as well as our canola oil, have been genetically modified, and they've been modified to be resistant to herbicides, which means they can be sprayed with herbicides, many of which are classified as probable carcinogens by the World Health Organization. Or else they've been engineered to produce their own pesticides. These plants are literally registered with the EPA as pesticides. They're living pesticide factories. Okay, so that's what GMO agriculture has brought us. It hasn't brought us better yields or more drought resistance or better flavor or better nutrition. It's brought us more pesticides and more herbicides, right? Okay, so given that reality, a lot of people are saying, hey, I want to know if I'm eating GMOs. Mm-hmm. And 90% of the American public wants that. And yet the food industry has been staunchly opposed because they're afraid that if people saw GMO labeling, as they have it throughout Europe, as they have it in 64 other countries around the world, including China and Russia and many other places, if we had that, then consumers might actually make different choices, right?
Yep.
But the reality is I think that should be up to the consumers to decide. And the food industry doesn't have a stake in Monsanto's business. They just want to sell what the consumer wants, right? That's how it should work. So anyway, we're trying to say to a lot of food industry folks, look, stop fighting this. Get on the right side of history. Okay, so a lot of ballot initiatives have come up in different states for GMO labeling on a state level. And the food industry has been very opposed to this, particularly because they say, hey, we can't have a patchwork quilt of different laws in different states. We want a federal uniform standard, right? Yep. But what we've seen is that federally, it's been a no-win game because the federal government is totally controlled by corporate interests. There is no way to do a ballot initiative on a national scale. We can't have a national referendum on the topic. Our political system in the United States doesn't allow for that. So throughout history, states have been often the champions, whether it was on women's right to vote, on gay marriage, on cannabis legalization or medical marijuana, on all kinds of issues. Whatever side of them you are on these issues, the reality is that states have often been the harbingers or the pioneers of new ways of thinking and new ways of practicing. Obviously getting rid of slavery as well, right? So they've been the harbingers, and in time things have become national and accepted as normal. But it all often started at the state level. So a lot of activists have said, hey, let's focus on ballot initiatives at the state level. What has happened in every state this has happened in, we've had major initiatives in California, Washington, and Oregon, is that Monsanto was joined by the junk food industry in spending massive amounts of money, like record-shattering tens of millions of dollars, burying the state in a bunch of misleading ads, and ultimately, by the narrowest of margins, in each of those cases, GMO labeling lost. But in many cases, people were still for labeling. They just were duped into thinking that this was a bad bill, right? And so what happened in Oregon, which was very interesting, is that the Grocery Manufacturers Association was the largest single funder of the anti-labeling side. It was putting in about $20 million. And their donors were concealed. They just said it was from them. They didn't say where they got the money. And now Oregon happens to have a campaign finance law that makes that practice illegal. So the state attorney general wound up suing the Grocery Manufacturers Association. There is still an ongoing lawsuit going on because they basically swung the election by doing this. But they ended up having to reveal their donors. And what we found out was that their donors were companies like Pepsi and Coca-Cola and other big junk food companies, right?
Surprise,
but
surprise.
What that told us at the Food Revolution Network was that those companies didn't really want to be seen for fighting GMO labeling, because they say that they support consumer empowerment and transparency. But here they were actually secretly and illegally funding a campaign against transparency and consumer empowerment, right? And we got that they felt vulnerable. So we decided that as an organization wanting to change this, we could have the most leverage by focusing on them and bringing a lot of attention to this issue. So we started a campaign called CokeBoycott.com, and we went straight to Coca-Cola and we said, hey, look, you say that you support transparency and consumer empowerment, but look at what you're doing. And so we're going to boycott you, and we're going to focus on the natural brands that you own. So here's the interesting side of the story, Pedram, is that the big food industry is buying up a lot of natural brands. So 80% of the natural products you see in Whole Foods are actually owned by big corporate food giants.
Yeah.
So while some people decry this and say that we're losing the integrity of the natural food sector, and that there's a legitimate argument there, the other side of it is that the junk food industry, or big food if you want to say it that way, has now a vested interest in the success of the natural brands they own. Yep. So we said, hey, Honest Tea is actually one of Coca-Cola's profit centers, right? And this is a company that was founded as a visionary company. They believe in fair trade. They're all organic. They're all non-GMO. They were among the founders of the Just Label It campaign in the United States. Then they got bought by Coca-Cola. So we decided to focus on Honest Tea particularly. And so that's led us into a very interesting dialogue that's still ongoing, with the company and other companies in the food industry. But what I want to say is that as consumers, we have a lot of power. And the big food is actually feeling kind of nervous because we want the right to know what's in our food, right? And we want to know if our food's genetically modified, and we can hold them accountable. And by choosing to focus on some of these natural brands, we can perhaps have a bigger impact. Because not a lot of people that I know are drinking a ton of Coca-Cola, but a lot of them are drinking a lot of Honest Tea or Adwala or Zico coconut water or Dasani bottled water. And when we shift our focus around those products, we also can have a big impact.
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One is the greenwashing, right? Where you'll have like say Tom's toothpaste, where it's like I stand for this thing, and then he sells out, and all of a sudden ingredients start getting swapped, and then so Honest Tea might not have the same sort of fair trade supply chain, and so then there's this de-evolution of the natural foods kind of industry. Some of them have been left alone, and to the credit of kind of the big big companies, they said, look, something's right here. Let's just go with it. and it's starting to ripple through the industry, but it's not all clean. It's not like, all companies are evil and kind of distorting the supply chain, and then the other way around. But as a consumer then, because we have a couple ways of voting. One is, we have these ballot initiatives, and absolutely, that's how democracy works. We go in there, we push to get the legislation to make things right. But I can choose every time I go down to Whole Foods or wherever I do my grocery shopping as well, and I can elect to not purchase. So when you're talking about a boycott, you're boycotting this thing and saying, well, just don't drink their tea and hit them in the pocketbook. So I'd love to kind of unpack that a little more in terms of how that can empower a huge shift.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the power of the purse is a pretty powerful one, and here's what I want to say about this, and you just touched on it, but that you can be a food revolutionary every single day of your life. And being a food revolutionary has, I think, fundamentally two dimensions. And one is what you choose to stand for your own life. How do you want to take care of your health? What do you want to take into your body? Your food is very personal. It's very intimate. What you eat literally becomes you. So when you eat food that's toxic, that's been adulterated and processed, and that's full of added sugar and added chemicals and pesticides and hormones and antibiotics, then that's going to have an impact. It's going to impact on your health, on your survival, on whether or not you get cancer or heart disease. It may impact your weight. It's going to impact how you feel, how you sleep, your sex life, everything, right? Yeah. At the same time, it's also very political, right? When you choose to vote with your food choices for integrity, for your own health and wellness, and also for the world that you want, then it's one of the most powerful steps you can take in terms of standing up for a healthy future. And what I think is beautiful about this is that this is one of those places in life where you actually don't have to make a trade-off between your own well-being and your political values. Because it turns out that the same food choices that are best for you, that are non-toxic, that are natural, that are going to help you to thrive, are also going to help to build a more sustainable and fair and just and healthy and vibrant future for our planet.
Yeah, and the supply chains that you're supporting do the better things, are cleaner companies, they're making the world a better place. And it's this really interesting time that we're in, because it actually gives us a lot of cause for enthusiasm, because it's really easy to say, oh, the world's going to hell in a handbasket. Yeah. But there are lots of ways that we can nudge things in the right direction every single day with every single purchase, and that's great.
Yeah. It's true. And, as bad as things are with our food system, that's how much better they can be with a change. And the great news about that is that levels of sickness and misery and suffering that we have come to take as normal are actually not necessary. A recent major study concluded that more Americans died last year from toxic food than from any other source, more than smoking, and more than died in all of World War II, the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, and the Afghanistan War combined in one single year. We're talking 700,000 or so deaths from poor diet in last year. So what that means is, yes, that's sobering, it's disturbing, it's painful, it's heart-wrenching when you see 1 out of 3 kids expected to get diabetes, when you see obesity and overweight issues now impacting 2/3 plus of our population. Right? When you see families torn apart, when you see kids losing their dads, when you see spouses losing their husbands, or wives, it's heartbreaking. But what's also beautiful is that we can do better. We can do vastly better. And I think that's a source of immense hope, because there's a lot of problems in this world that can feel totally overwhelming. We look at war and violence and violence in the Middle East. We look at what's going on with Syrian refugees. We look at the climate crisis, and we can feel overwhelmed and lost and say, is it even possible that there's hope for our species, right? Yep. And those are totally legitimate questions. At the same time, I think what we're saying in the Food Revolution Network is yes. Yes, it is possible that there's hope. And in the area of food, it's not just possible, it's a certainty. And it's not just hope, it's actually opportunity. Right? Yeah. We don't have to just sit on the sidelines and hope and pray for something. We can actually live it. And when we do, the results are predictable. Yeah. When you choose to take more healthy food into your body, you will be healthier. Obviously, everyone's going to have their own unique journey. Some people I know have, they eat toxic food their whole life, they make a shift, and then they get sick, and they're like, oh, it doesn't work. Well, no, it takes time. It takes energy. Obviously,
Yeah.
there's no cure-all miracle for everything. But the bottom line is that the more you eat enough fiber, enough phytonutrients, enough antioxidants, the more you eat enough of the basic nutrients you need to thrive, the less you eat the toxic oils and the junk food and the chemicals and the added sugars, the healthier you're going to be. Long-term, statistically, it's predictable. And the beautiful thing there is that you actually have the opportunity to take your life and your health more fully into your own hands without being dependent on doctors and medicine or luck, right?
Yeah.
And I'm excited about that. I'm excited to share that because I want to help people to be thriving and healthy and alive and vital. And in food, we have that opportunity.
And we're seeing it in some interesting places, right? So there's all this like farm to table. There's these amazing kind of blossoming communities around organic and local organic, and how the organic supply chains are getting shifted, where there's, you know, warehouses in Detroit to, you know, kind of inner city hubs in Atlanta. And there's a lot of stories that land on my desk and yours about hope. Right? And so I'd love for you to share some of that from your side, because you see a lot of this. And, you know, our average listener or viewer is maybe siloed in their, like, you know, in their universe, maybe only just getting bad news. And so let's share some of the good news.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, meta statistics. Okay, since the year 2000, we've seen a four-fold increase in sales of organic foods. In the last 5 years, we've seen certified non-GMO products go from nothing to over $7 billion in sales. Whole Foods has reported that when the same product gets certified non-GMO, their sales uptick in the Whole Foods markets is 20%.
Wow.
So consumers care.
Yeah.
And we're also seeing a massive increase in fair trade certified foods, which is giving farmers a living wage, which is helping them to survive. You know, and in some cases even to thrive and to send their kids to school and to have a fighting chance at a healthier life for the next generation. Yeah. You know, this is huge stuff, and American consumers are driving it. Also, community-supported agriculture is growing fast. Now, a few success stories. I'm inspired by Ron Finley, the guerrilla gardener in South Central Los Angeles, who talks about how, you know, the drive-throughs are killing more people than the drive-bys. And he talks about how he says we don't live in a food desert, we live in a food prison, because you got to break out in order to get real food, because he's in a community where there's liquor stores and there's junk food everywhere, but you've got to travel outside the community to a whole other neighborhood where it's dangerous for people with his skin color to even be with in order to get real food, you know. So what he's doing in that context is he's taking the space in front of front yards that's owned by the city, but that's actually something that tenants are allowed to cultivate as they wish. And he's growing food there, making gardens. And he uses rainwater catchment from his own roof and roofs of his neighbors. They catch rainwater and they water using that. And the food is free. People walk by in the neighborhood, homeless folks come through, they can just eat it. He's just growing it. He says, I want these people to eat it. And he sees someone trying to sneak some, and he shouts out to them, hey, you're not stealing, man. This is for everybody. You know?
That's great.
And then people get excited and they get touched, and then they start wanting to help, and they want to start help care for the garden and grow food in the neighborhood. And so he's trying to spark a revolution in South Central Los Angeles with this guerrilla gardening movement. And I think that's one beautiful thing. It's literally bringing food and the growing of food to the people, right? Yeah. And we see other examples of this in a lot of the growth of community gardens, which are massively increasing. You know what city in the United States has the highest number of community gardens per capita? Is Detroit. So this is a city that's been devastated by economic catastrophe. The average home sale price in Detroit is about $15,000. It's it's lost half of its population in the last generation. And so there's tons of vacant lots. So one thing they've got is a lot of unemployed people and a lot of vacant lots with nothing going on. So then they combine those two resources, and people are taking some of the time they have when they're not working and some of the land that's available that no one's living on, and they're growing food. Yeah. And this is an example to me of how human beings can respond to crisis with creativity and innovation and find solutions. And we're seeing that, I think, in the food movement today all over the place. Whatever community you live in, whatever economic context you're in, you have an opportunity to take steps, to make choices, and to reap the benefits.
It's such a fascinating kind of full circle story with Detroit as well, because Detroit was kind of the flagship city of American industry.
Yeah.
And as that all changed, it was like the original kind of conversation between kind of like Madison's kind of industrialists and then Jefferson, which the Jeffersonian vision of America was having a much more agrarian local base. And the fact that Detroit is shifting from GM and auto capital to kind of homegrown agrarian is such a poetic story of where this country has gone and returned to. So it's a really interesting one to watch. And look, it's not like California where you just throw a seed on the ground and it grows. I mean, it's cold. So we are doing things in climates that are not ideal for farming, and it's still working.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're growing food, obviously you relate to the seasons.
Sure.
And you find out what works in your community. And there are things that need cold winters to grow.
Yeah.
I live in California, and there's stuff we can't grow. All kinds of peaches and nectarines and certain types of apples and blueberries that just don't do very well here because we don't have enough cold winters. So I think there's something beautiful about that. And it's something about the biodiversity of this planet and the biodiversity of our ecosystems, that every location has what it's best for,
Yeah.
And if you can find that, then the odds are, if you live there long enough, that the nutrients that you get from your own ecosystem are probably, I think, going to be beneficial to you as well. Because, and that's something about eating seasonally as well, because I actually believe that when you eat food that's from your community and that's linked to the season you're in, you're more connected to the natural biorhythms of where you are. And in a time when so many people feel lost, feel alone, feel disconnected, feel some sense of isolation and loneliness, I think that restoring a sense of place and a sense of relationship to our experience of food can actually be very restorative to the human spirit.
Amen. Amen. So people who start eating right, start feeling better, they don't fall into the trap of the $3 trillion medical industry, which pretty much just tees off on chronic disease from lifestyle issues that come from, just eating garbage. And then they start making better decisions. They get more clarity. They become better, they have more agency and stakeholders in this planet. And so it obviously is working, which is really good news. So now the question is, where do we take it from here? Like what, do we go after and shame Pepsi and Coke and kind of go after them for those practices, or do we reward them for moving over? I mean, there's a lot of, approaches that are being talked about out there.
Sure, absolutely. Well, we need all of it, to be honest with you. I think we need a biodiversity of tactics for the food revolution, right? We need the farmers. We need the radical folks who are saying organic isn't good enough. We need to keep organic meaning something. We need regenerative agriculture. We don't need organic incorporated. We also need the folks who are mainstreamizing stuff. We need the fact that Walmart's selling organic food. Something that's a step in the right direction.
Yep.
It doesn't mean that I want to support Walmart, but I appreciate that they can take a step like that. And I appreciate the consumers who are going to reward them financially for taking that step. Because at the end of the day, there's going to be less pesticides on this planet. There's going to be less farm workers dying of cancer. There's going to be less animals treated horribly. There's going to be less people suffering because they're eating toxic food if we move in that direction. At the same time, it's not necessarily good enough to produce something that is missing certain chemicals or toxins, but it's full of other chemicals and toxins. Anytime you see, what food isn't on the package, you have to wonder what it is. If it's low fat, right? Well, we found out that low fat generally translates into high sugar. If it says sugar-free, that might mean that it's got some artificial sweetener in it, right? And that can trick the brain and do crazy stuff to our body. So ultimately, I'm much more interested in food that doesn't have a lot of packages. But each person's got to find out, where you are. And from where you are, the question isn't what's the perfect, pristine place to be. The question is, how do you move in a good direction? So I don't think healthy food is a destination. I think it's a movement. I think it's a journey. And I think that what's right for you at any stage of your life is going to depend tremendously on your ecosystem, on your background, on your life history, on your values and your integrity, on your sense of ethics, on how healthy or well you are, on your weight level, on your metabolism, and on your life stage. So there's no cookie cutter one size fits all recipe for this is what everyone should do. What there is a general sense of guiding principle and a movement growing of people who are completely fed up with the status quo, who are saying, the American diet has almost couldn't have been more detrimental to our health if it was designed to cause heart disease and cancer and diabetes, right?
Yeah.
And so we can do so much better. And what better means for you specifically is something each person's got to explore and discover. But I want to light the flame of saying yes to that path of discovery, to that path of curiosity, and to everyone knowing we can play that part. And in terms of the policy level, I mean, I think the biggest low-hanging fruit that I see is GMO labeling, supported by 92% of the American public. That's number one. If we had GMO labeling, by the way, we might see some different practices around the use of GMOs because consumers would vote with their dollars more intelligently. If that's the
100%.
case, then so be it, right? I don't know if the food industry is going to have to change practices or not, but I do know that an educated consumer is a more intelligent consumer in terms of the choices that they make, and the industry needs to be accountable to that.
Yeah.
Number two is getting routine use of antibiotics out of factory farms. So our antibiotics are fast losing their efficacy. More than 20,000 Americans died last year from diseases that were caused by antibiotic-resistant bacteria.
Yeah.
Now,
And that number is going to rise.
80% of our antibiotics are being used in factory farms. They're not being used on humans. There's a lot of work in medicine to say, hey, we've been overusing these things. We've been overprescribing them, and we're jeopardizing their viability for the next generation by doing so. So rightfully so, a lot of doctors are now being more judicious in prescribing antibiotics for humans. But 80% of our antibiotic use is in animals. So that's where we really have to look if we want to preserve these medicines for future generations. And they're not even given to sick animals. They're given to make them gain weight faster and to keep them alive in sick conditions. Yeah. So by eliminating their routine use in our factory farms, we start to shift the factory farming system so that it needs to move in a more humane direction. And so that's another one that I think is critical. And then I also want to see us moving towards some taxes on soda. Sugary soda is implicated in a tremendous number of deaths. And quite frankly, I think we should take a page out of the cigarette industry playbook and look at what happened. That we reduced cigarette smoking in the US by over 50% in just one generation. And we could do the exact same things to sugary soda, and we would see probably hundreds of thousands of lives spared and massive savings in medical costs. And the simple things are, you tax it, you use that tax money to help fund education programs and obesity prevention programs, and then you put some kind of warning label on there, and then you restrict where it's sold and how it's advertised so that it's not able to target kids. And just with making those simple changes, we could make a huge impact. Now, obviously, the soda industry is not going to like it, but when we ultimately look at what we should be standing up for, what's more important, the profits of a few companies or the health and well-being of our entire population?
Yeah. Capitalism took an interesting turn, and so suddenly I can't believe we're even having to have this conversation, which is the hard part. So, okay, let's just say that there's some like top hat wearing, cigar smoking, sociopath bad guys that are like, doing this thing with their fingers and kind of talking about how to destroy the world in some corner. And then there's the people, and I'm being a little flippant, obviously, because there's very few of those.
Yeah.
Then there's the people that are like, dude, I've been working in Angola and Somalia, and like global hunger is such a big deal, and I'm convinced that we need to mess with the food in order to get the yields that we need to feed a starving population. Yeah. So what's the answer to that? Because I mean, America has this other problem, right? We're not starving, we're exploding. Yeah. But then the rest of the world has all sorts of crises that we're also trying to be resolute on. And so there's just weird kind of conflicting conversations happening around this.
Well, I think we need to redefine hunger. So conventionally, hunger is defined as caloric deprivation. But you know and I know that not all calories are created equal.
Sure.
That people aren't actually dying. At one level, yeah, sure, they're dying because they straight up don't have enough calories. But I think we need to define it as nutritional deprivation, because that's every bit as lethal as caloric deprivation. Yeah. And there's about 750 million people on the planet who are calorically deprived. They're chronically hungry. But there's about 1.5 billion people on the planet who are nutritionally deprived, who are not getting the basic nutrients they need to survive. And so international aid agencies have traditionally measured their success and their ability to bring down the number of calorically deprived people. But they do so often by finding the cheapest measures available, which are gifting surplus commodities to the poorest people in the world. Yeah. And then they end up having their high fructose corn syrup and their white flour and their toxic products, and these people, yes, they live, but they're not getting the basic nutrients they need to sustain and thrive, and they're coming down with illness, and they're suffering, and they're dying nonetheless. And in the United States, we don't have that many people, although sadly we do have quite a few, who are calorically deprived, but we have a lot more who are nutritionally deprived. And some of the people who are very overweight are actually starving. They feel hungry all the time because they're starving for real nutrients, for real food. But their neurology has been wired through a lifetime of eating certain foods to think that hunger is satiated by eating the sugar and the fats and the nutrients that they're used to. Unfortunately, those foods are depriving them of some of the fiber and some of the antioxidants and some of the basic nutrients that they actually need, that their body is crying out for. So if we could shift to thinking of it from a nutritional standpoint, then we'd have a much better metric for how we actually care for the well-being and health of the world's people. That said, we absolutely need to grow enough food for the world's folks, right? And there's no question, I want to see an end to hunger. And, I'm not some altruistic, high-minded, I'm not so altruistic and high-minded that I'm going to lose the basic fundamental reality that I want to take care of people. I think that's basic, right? And so I want to grow enough food. And what I want to say, though, is that the organic agriculture, just to be straight up about it here, has been found to be about 10% less yield producing per acre than conventional agriculture, right? And that's often one of the biggest arguments against it. But what we also know is that there have been billions of dollars spent on research and development for how to make conventional agriculture more productive per acre. We haven't invested nearly that kind of thought, attention, resources in looking at how to compost properly, how to use manure properly, how to build up the soil, how to make it more sustainable and regenerative. And we absolutely know that organic agriculture, when it's done right, leads to more topsoil, not less topsoil, which leads to better nutrients in the food and leads to plants that are more resistant to droughts, more resistant to floods, more resistant to bugs coming in that can wipe out an entire crop, that it's actually more sustainable and it's an investment in the future. So if we were to apply serious commitment to looking at how we do organic agriculture right, I have no doubt that within a generation we could have yields going up significantly in this method. And let's be very clear that GMO agriculture hasn't brought any increased yields. In fact, it's brought reduced yields on a per acre basis. So this is entirely about increasing company profits and adding more pesticides into the system. It is not about increasing yield.
Yeah. So using petroleum-based fertilizers and just giving the plants the very minimum they need in order to produce isn't actually doing what is the promise of the nutritional piece of that, which is extracting the minerals through the roots, through the topsoil that actually has life and abundance living in there. One of the important pieces to this that has been really, we just did a couple stories on it, it's been blowing my mind, is that we can actually sequester a lot of the carbon in our atmosphere back into the soil and support global hunger and support ... by doing this right. And I think the point that you bring up is really clear. I mean, look, we're not going to solve Africa's starvation problems because of climate and because of warlords and all sorts of crazy stuff that's happening all over the place. But the money that's going into the research has been petroleum-based products. It's been chemicals that are dumping into the soil and making us sicker, and putting a little bit of that money into kind of organic innovation, like the Rodale Institute has some great stuff happening. It carries a lot of promise, and our tax dollars are just heading in the wrong direction. So I'd love to see a little bit more of that. And I know you guys do a ton of advocacy. You're such a busy guy, and you've been at this for a while. You don't have to do what you're doing. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do. And technically, I guess you do have to do what you're doing, but most people don't see it that way because they just, go to Macy's. Oh, wait, Macy's is out of business. It's like everything is crumbling around. Everyone's wondering what's wrong with the world. It's like, well, start with your kitchen, start with what you do. What can we do other than buy the right stuff in terms of legislative nudging to create that groundswell? Because the sentiment that needs to be overwhelming to drive the political will is fragmented, right? We're being outspent and out-hustled by their media. So what do we need to do there?
Well, I want to let you know that in the US, and I know not everyone who's watching right now is in the US, but in our political system, one of the things we have is the opportunity to actually interact with our elected officials. And you actually can go to set up a meeting with your member of Congress. I mean, you can do that. And they'll give you 15 minutes on the calendar, and you can certainly do it in Washington, D.C., but you can also do it in your own community. And it's a constituency visit. And, give them some lead time, tell them why you want to meet with them, and represent your issue. And you'll find out where they stand on it. And you give them a piece of your mind. And, if more people did that, you'd be amazed. These big food industry people have a ton of lobbyists. There's about 20 lobbyists in Washington, D.C. for every elected official. And these people's full-time job is to try to influence policy, right? But we, the people, can also meet with people and get in the door and have a conversation and talk about it and get to know it and decide whether your official represents you or not, right? And so that's one piece of democracy in action. Obviously voting, obviously organizing, obviously, getting involved in, ballot measures. There's all kinds of ways we can vote, but talking to people is a political act. Obviously choosing what you eat and where you spend your money, choosing where you shop, choosing what you buy, and frankly, choosing how you prepare your food is all powerful. I think that food is really a place where the personal and the political meet. And having conversations about food, sharing real food. I think actually cooking for people that you love, good, healthy food, may be one of the most powerful political acts you can take. Because you are contagiously sharing something wonderful with them that's going to influence how they think about healthy food. And it's not just one meal, it's an introduction. It's a gateway drug, if you want to think of it that way, in the best possible way. And so I'm a big fan of bringing joy and beauty and nourishment to our relationship with food, and looking at that as also an expression of our political commitments and our policy goals. So all that said, I guess I want to add another piece which ties in so deeply to your work with the urban monk, and it's the power of gratitude. There's been a lot of research that's been done on the neuroscience of gratitude, and what we're finding is, it's pretty intuitively obvious that when you think positive thoughts, you're going to feel happier because your positive thoughts are going to put you in a positive mindset, right? What isn't so obvious is that things don't just feel better when you're grateful. They actually get better. Gratitude is statistically correlated with lower rates of disease, higher life expectancy, better sleep, more happiness. And I'm talking like spending 5 minutes a day just journaling things you're grateful for. Or once a week having a conversation with somebody where you go back and forth saying things you're grateful for. Or saying grace around the dinner table with your family every other day. These things are statistically correlated with all kinds of positive health benefits as well as psychological. And so my point here is that gratitude can be restorative. It can be rejuvenative. And it's a beautiful way to bring people together around the dinner table. And I'm so grateful, I have to say, for having real food to eat, for having food at all. I'm grateful for the farm workers and all the people that made it possible. I'm grateful for the people who prepared the food, shopped for it, brought it into my world, the people who trucked it and shipped it, the earth, the water, the rain, everything that it took to bring every bite of food into my life is honestly something I'm grateful for, and I would not be alive without it. So feeling that gratitude and living into it, I know is good for me. It's also good for my social life. When we're more grateful, we tend to, almost every relationship I know of, people want their spouse to appreciate them more, So what better way to start that cycle of gratitude going than by just expressing it and feeling it? So I'm really big on that because I think food can be an opportunity to restore the sacred into our lives, to restore the sense of community and the web of life into our most intimate experience of what we take into our bodies.
It's amazing that most people are complaining about weight gain and how they have such a terrible relationship with food. And what you're saying here to me is also a very important place to heal your relationship with your body and your self-image is how you ingest the food. If you are what you eat, and if you come to that with gratitude, then you assimilate your food in a very different way. And it's also very powerful, it's very spiritual, and it's very uplifting. So, I mean, I love it, man. Ocean, you're hustling out there. You're working really hard. I know you have your food revolution annually. Where can people connect with you and be able to kind of like lock arms with you and get involved in some of this stuff?
Well, we produce the Food Revolution Summit every year, and it's an incredible convergence of some of the top food experts on the planet. And I work directly with my dad, best-selling author John Robbins. It's an incredible joy to work with him, and we interview food experts and leaders, and we share their inspiring messages with the world. And it's a free online summit. And so people can sign up for that. Even if we don't have a summit coming up right at this moment, you can always sign up and learn about last year's summit and get some of the interviews from it, and then be on the list so that when we have our next summit, you're ready to go. So that's foodrevolutionsummit.org is the place to join in for that. And you can also find us at foodrevolution.org, where we've got a ton of blog articles and resources and tools to help support your food revolutionary journey. And what I also want to say, though, Pedram, is that a lot of times people are pitching an organization or a cause, and that's great. We need organizations and causes to help us on the path. But most of all, what I'm standing for is something bigger than any one organization, including our own. The food revolution, to me, is a lot bigger than the Food Revolution Network. It's a movement, and you're part of that revolution. And all of the listeners are part of that revolution. Every time we choose real food over processed junk, every time we choose to eat food that isn't saturated in pesticides and hormones and antibiotics, and that's giving us the life-giving nutrients we need to thrive, we are food revolutionaries. And so I just want to welcome everybody. You are a member of the Food Revolution, whether you join our network or not. But of course, we love to have as many people as possible joining in our free summit and signing up for our list and checking out our blog articles, because obviously we make this all available because we want to get it out to people and help people.
Yeah, and you do a great job, and you get the biggest names in the industry, and you are one of the hardest working guys in the business, and it's all about getting information in the right hands. And so, yeah, I mean, I'll start with the revolutionary food act of eating some broccoli after this, you know what I mean?
Beautiful.
One bite at a time. So Ocean, man, I love you. Thank you so much for doing what you do, and I'm going to keep pestering you because you're like, you got your finger on the pulse of a lot of the stuff out there, and I love having you on the team, man. We're all doing this for our children's children.
We are. Thank you so much, Pedram.
Thank you.